So, Lone Rider here, and wanted to talk about bike assembly. So the other day I was in a shop and was in a store, and the guy at the counter, noticing that I sometimes came by bike, he asked me, "So I used to bike, and I'm thinking about getting back into it. Can you recommend a good place to get a decent bike?" And I recommended several shops, starting with a shop run by a friend of mine. Then I gave him some other options because he was not from the area. So um, I gave him I recommended that shop first, but then I recommended other shops in other areas that he might be familiar with, or easier for him to get to. But I stressed that the issue wasn't so much the brand of bike. Um, the issue was the assembly at the shop by the shop that sold the bikes. And what a lot of people don't realize is that a bicycle is one of the few consumer products that has to be basically prepped and assembled and tuned, more or less, by the seller. So if you go to a store and you buy a ball cap, it they take it out of the box and put it on the shelf. That's literally all they do. If you go to place and you buy you know food stuff, plates, cups, coffee mugs, all they do is they unpack them and put them on the shelf. If you buy a TV, they take the TV and they they put it on the shelf. Literally, that's all they do. When you buy a car, you know, they the dealer puts the car there, puts the for sale sign on it, and that's pretty much it. The dealers don't get the cars in pieces and have to put them together and adjust the bearings and grease all the bolts. Just like they don't have to, have a kiln and make their own pottery, or have a seamstress that sews their own hats, or have electricians, soldering the inside of their TVs. Um, with bikes, you actually do have to do that. You have to take the bike out of the box, and normally the wheels, the seat, and the handlebars and the pedals are not attached. Everything else is usually all attached, more or less. So there's a lot of people who think that basically getting a bike ready for sale simply involves throwing on the pedals, the seat, and adjusting the handlebars. Here's the problem with that. If you think that that's all that basically putting a bike together entails, you're wrong. The bike is put in the box, mostly assembled, but not assembled to the degree that it's ready to ride. It's mostly assembled simply for packing purposes to get it in the box. To actually get that bike ready to ride, you have to not only attach the pedals, the seat, and the handlebars, you have to take the wheels off and adjust the hubs. Most hubs have two bearing surfaces, one on each side. Now, if they're steel bearing hubs, that's not an issue, but um, a lot of bikes still have hubs that need adjustment. You have to check the true of the wheels. If they're not true, you have to true them. You have to grease the axle bolts and or quick release skewers. So you have to take those off, grease them, put them back on. You have to grease the seat post when you put the seat in. You have to grease the bolts that hold it, or the quick release if it's a quick release. You have to grease the pedals and put them on. You have to grease the bolts that hold the cranks on, and then tighten them, or at the very least check that they're tight. You have to adjust the bearings in the headset. You have to adjust the bearings in the bottom bracket, again, unless it's a sealed bearing bottom bracket. But there's a lot of bikes that still don't have that, especially entry level ones. Then you have to, when you put the handlebars on, you have to check. You have to take out and grease and then retighten every bolt in the stem and the handlebar assembly. So a lot of modern bikes don't have quill stems; they have threadless stems. So there's a series of clamps on the stem. Let's see if I have one here. And I don't think I actually do. Okay, well, to illustrate, I don't have an actual threadless stem here, unfortunately, but um, there's a clamp that goes around the steerer tube that usually has two bolts, and then on the front of the stem There's usually a removable faceplate that holds the handlebar on. That can have anywhere from 2 to 4 bolts. Okay, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bolts on that stem that need to be removed, greased, and then put back in place. Um, then you have to go over the brakes. You have to make sure they line up, that they're even. You have to adjust those, and then you have to adjust the shifting. Check it at a minimum that the gears are true and not skipping or whatever. So um, there's a lot that goes into putting a bike together properly to a proper assembly. And so when you're looking to buy a new bike, basically the shop you buy it from and their reputation for mechanical assembly and for quality of assembly is essentially more important than the brand you're looking at. I mean, you could buy 2 bikes, let's say 2 Trek mountain bikes, right? And they could both be the exact same model of bike, cost the exact same amount. But one, you could start having problems with it after 6 months of hard riding. The other one might last you years before you need to bring it in for a checkup. The difference is the quality of assembly, okay? And good way to check is when you're at a bike shop, you take the front wheel off and you just spin the bearings by hand, spin the axle by hand. If it feels gritty, they haven't adjusted the bearings. And since the front wheel is basically the easiest to access, especially compared to the back, if they haven't done that, they probably haven't done anything else on the bike. It's not a guarantee, but it's a quick and dirty way to check. So when you're looking to buy a bike, make sure the most important thing is the shop you're buying it from, because like I said, it's one of the few consumer products that really has to be gone over mechanically by the seller. And a lot of people don't think of this because it's not something that's necessary when you're buying, pottery or sunglasses or clothing or electronics, but it is something that's necessary when you're buying a bicycle. Now, that's not to say there aren't differences in brands. Some brands are going to have different designs. A lot of the bikes are made overseas in the same handful of factories. So, there may not be a tremendous difference, but a lot of times there's a design difference. Some brands, for example, are known for having different seat tube angles, depending on your riding style and what's comfortable for you. Le Monde bikes, for example, were known for having a very relaxed seat tube angle, and I love those. They just rode really great. But as far as build quality, how different was Le Monde from other bikes out there? It's hard to say because they basically were all made in the same factories overseas. But from a design aspect, yes, a particular brand might have certain features or certain differences in frame geometry, if you're talking about mountain bikes, for example, a certain suspension type that's more suited to your ride style or, whatever. So certainly look at different brands. But when you're done looking at the different brands and all the features they offer, remember the importance of the mechanical assembly by the shop that's actually selling the bike. The bike shop isn't just a dealer, isn't just a retailer. It's the people who do the final assembly of the bike that you're going to be riding on and trusting your safety and your enjoyment of cycling too. And a poorly assembled bike isn't just potentially unsafe or prone to mechanical problems down the line, which will cost you inconvenience and repair money. It's also something that might turn you off to cycling, and it's not going to be as enjoyable to ride, right? Nobody likes riding a bike that's squeaky or that has parts that come loose or that has gears that skip. And the most important thing when you're looking to buy a bike, and I can't stress this enough, is the shop you're buying it from. Make sure you're buying it from a good shop. Not every shop does the same. Any bike shop is going to basically do a much better assembly than, let's say, Kmart or something, right? Anything else that ends in Mart, Walmart, Kmart, whatever. And those bikes also generally have much more inferior part specs. So even if they do a proper assembly, which is unlikely, there's only so much you can do with them. But that said, well, generally speaking, most bike shops are going to do a better quality of assembly than, let's say, a big box store. Not all bike shops are equal. So make sure you find a good one and make sure you educate yourself a little bit before you walk in that door. Because if the shop does a crappy assembly, they're not going to tell you. Okay? So make sure you're looking at buying a bike. make sure it's well put together, and the best way to do that is make sure you find a good shop. So, Lone Rider out.